What's up guys, today I'm going to be reviewing Star Wars The Last Jedi, so if you don't want any spoilers, click off the video. So I'm basically fresh out of watching it. I watched it last night and this is the following day afterwards. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be outlining some of the story, so warning there will be a lot of spoilers, so I would recommend, if you haven't seen it, stop actually trying to find videos that spoil the whole thing for you, and if you rolled up on this by mistake, I'd recommend clicking it off, because otherwise you'll have the whole plot ruined for you, and that's not what you want. And I'll also be answering a few questions and asking a few questions which were lingering after actually watching it. And these will be the same questions as what a lot of people actually wanted to actually hear as well. So first of all, I actually did watch this quite late. I watched it yesterday at like 10 to 10 and it did finish around 1 o'clock. The movie did say 3 hours. So this is obviously understandable. Going into it was nearly 3 hours. Basically I think it was 2 hours 55 minutes or 57 minutes runtime. So it is a long movie, but if you actually get immersed into it and you actually put your full focus into watching it, it doesn't seem like a 3 hour movie, it just seems like a normal long movie. Usually in normal 3 hour movies where I can't get my head immersed in it entirely, I do start to fall asleep. For an example, this is Blade Runner 2049. I found the majority of the actual film really interesting and good. Towards the last quarter of the film, I did find myself kind of falling asleep a little bit because the end of the plot got quite slow and it wasn't as interesting and as alive as the start of the film. That was Blade Runner 2049, however. But when I actually watched The Last Jedi, Star Wars, I didn't get tired or bored. Obviously, it's a little bit uncomfortable when you're watching something for so long. The usual tendencies of feeling bored and tired didn't really set in or weren't an onset of actually watching it for a long time. So I didn't have a problem with boredom whatsoever, but that's just because I'm a huge fan. Kind of a bit of a bias. And all in all, I did think the film was mostly great. Basically what happens at the start is obviously from the last movie, Finn's been injured, so he's split up from Rey, and Rey's training on the island with Luke, or that's what she intends to do. So Finn is actually in some sort of cryo chamber or back to tank and he's actually healing, and he does wake up at some point in the film near the beginning, and he wakes up with all these tubes still rigged to him obviously for the healing process, and they're leaking, I guess leaking Bacta or whatever mineral or liquid they're using to help heal him, presumably Bacta. And he's wandering around the base and obviously Poe finds him and he's wondering where Rey is, and he says, "Where's Rey?" That's his first thought in his mind, because obviously he's still thinking back to the fight they had with Kylo. This is actually a really good piece of dialogue because it plays into the next scene really well. When he says that, it does one of the classic cuts and it goes to Act 2, where Rey is trying to find Luke. The continuation of the previous ending scene where Rey's handing the lightsaber is very much different in this. Obviously there's not a long lingering stare process, it's cut down a little bit, and when she reaches out to hand the lightsaber, which she does again, you would think that Luke would break down to tears or there'd be some sort of dialogue between them, but what actually does happen is actually something that was completely unexpected, or at least to me, because when Rey hands the lightsaber, Luke literally just throws it behind him and it goes straight in the sea. Definitely unexpected at the start. Octu is really cool as well because it's so small. I'm not sure if the planet Octu is just that one island or if that's just the one that Luke's on. I would presume it's just the one that Luke's on, obviously, because he's found the temple. And from here starts Rey's journey trying to beg Luke to come back and actually train her. And it's pretty cool because you see some certain creatures, I can't remember the creature's name, but Luke later does actually note that they were upholding the temple and keeping it built and making sure it didn't get damaged, so they were sort of the caretakers of it ever since it was made, which I thought was really awesome. Luke doesn't really want anything to do with it, anything to do with the Jedi, the dark, the light and stuff, and we find out that he's actually cut his connection to the Force in the film. And what happens is obviously Rey wants him to train her. Throughout the film she's following him on the island. It's kind of like a mirror back to The Empire Strikes Back. Just as Episode 7 was a mirror to Episode 4, it does have a few similarities, not entirely, but a few similarities. For an example, the planet Crait, which we'll note later, is very much so like Hoth from the 5th film, and Luke is very much so like Yoda's role in Empire Strikes Back. We also do see a hint to Empire Strikes Back as well, because Luke crashes his X-Wing on Dagobah, and Yoda sort of trains him to pull it out of the swamp or out of the water. Some people might not have actually noted on this, or if they did, they might not have actually realised it was a reference, but there is actually a crashed X-Wing or an X-Wing in the water, which is Luke's, on Act 2, so we do see that in the water. Unfortunately, we don't see Luke pull out or anyone use it. I guess it's just a hint back to Episode 5. After Luke declines to train Rey, there is actually a scene where she goes in the library and looks at these ancient Jedi scriptures, which apparently, according to Yoda later on, which we'll actually see, aren't so important and they won't really teach them anything more than what they had at the Jedi Temple. or the Coruscant Library and things like that. Luke wonders who she is. Why is the Resistance sent her? Why is Leia sent her out of everybody? What's so special about her? And I guess at this part of the movie he can't really sense that she's strong in the Force at all, because we do later find out that Luke has severed his connection to the Force. So eventually after that, I think he does agree to train her, I believe, or maybe it's later on. But by the point he does agree to train her, before he tells her, she is actually having some sort of weird moment. Throughout her actual experience on the island, I think around this time, she does start to have these apparitions or mental Force connections to Kylo Ren. So when they're in a room on their own, they do have a Force connection, and they start talking to each other about their intentions, and obviously Rey encouraging Kylo to come to the light and be redeemed, because she does sense some sort of conflict. And it's kind of weird because we do see in the 7th film Kylo using that sort of mind control power to tap into people's feelings and thoughts. This is very much so like that, because they do have a connection to each other and they can see each other's feelings, thoughts and actual future. And it's kind of strange because later on we do actually find out that Kylo actually mentions that he finds out who Rey's parents are by doing this. So it's really weird, and they do have this strange connection to each other, so it's kind of like the Force mind control power, but they're both doing it to each other. Luke has told her a little snippet before of what happened at the Jedi Temple that Luke was building and how Kylo ruined it. But Kylo gives his own rendition of the story to Rey in one of these thought processors, and he tells her that Luke sensed his power and wanted to kill it, and he's the reason why what he did. During this actual process, Luke does actually storm in, and he uses the Force to blast, I think he blasts the actual building apart. He just completely interrupts and uses the Force to cut the connection. Luke's trying to stop Rey from knowing more information, and he has actually already explained his half of the story. After some time though, we do learn that Luke says that it's his fault that Kylo went crazy, because in the temple at night time, he tapped into Kylo's mind and actually sensed more of a lingering darkness than he initially thought. And because of this, he felt that Kylo was too powerful, he was too far past being redeemed, and he felt that there was this sense of darkness. Kylo would become the next Sith Lord, and killing him would prevent anything bad from happening to his friends, or anything bad from happening to the new Resistance. So he has this moment of, he describes it in the film as a moment of weakness, where he's actually going to kill Kylo to prevent this from happening. Obviously this would be probably striking him down in anger, I believe. I'm not sure if that would have been a good thing to do. Luke does actually note that it happened so fast, and as he's going to strike the blow, Kylo actually turns around and forces his lightsaber up and actually blocks the blow. Since Kylo's so powerful, he does actually force Luke away, or he forces the building on top of him, and after this he sets the temple ablaze in a rage. So after Kylo's destruction of the temple, Rey is in two different minds. She's thinking, is Luke lying? Is Kylo being truthful? And obviously Luke, when confronted, does discuss the story in a bit more depth. So after quite some time of convincing, Luke does actually train Rey. He gives her a few different lessons and she gets trained. They have a series of lightsaber maneuvers, Force powers. There was some cool scenes, however, before Luke decided to train her. He went to these seal-looking alien animals on the shore and he just milked them and gets some milk from them, which is kind of strange, but it's actually really cool. And there's a few different animals like these porgs, which are kind of these cute aliens that make these sort of weird sounds that we see throughout the film, and eventually they nest on the Falcon, which is really awesome. So there's a lot of different aliens, and somehow Luke uses his acrobatics, I guess, through the Force, even though he's cut his ties to the actual connection of it. He jumps across the rocks with some large pole, and then he jumps down and stabs it into a fish, and then pulls it out of the water, which is really awesome as well. So you see how he's surviving on the island. After all the lessons have actually come to a close, Rey does actually leave the island because Luke doesn't want to come back with her and help her. After this, we do see some scenes with Yoda as a Force ghost, which is really awesome. And what they did was, instead of using CGI, they used more practical effects with this. I guess because they didn't want to annoy any fans of the original sequel films, and I guess to maintain an element of realism. So I'm not sure if it's stop motion. It kind of looks more like a puppet style. I think they've used a puppet like the originals. If they haven't and they did use CG, and it's my mistake, then it just looks like really good CG, because how it's made definitely looks like the original puppet style in the original films. So Yoda actually tells him about the old scriptures that Rey found of the Jedi in the actual cave, and tells him that it's actually mostly nonsense, nothing that they didn't know already. And he also tells Luke that he should probably go out and seek Rey and actually help her, so that she doesn't turn to the dark as well like Kylo did, because he says that for Kylo maybe it's too late, but for Rey it isn't. Rey's already left at this point, and then Yoda, I think it's Yoda, sets ablaze to this big tree or something. I'm not sure what the relevance was behind that, but it looked pretty cool. After this switches out, basically Rey goes back to help the Resistance. From my understanding, what happens is the last of the rebels, there's like 400 units or 400 rebels, they're pitted against the First Order, and the First Order come through hyperspace 1 or 2 times. At this point, Finn's obviously woke up, and they come through hyperspace and they actually lock onto the rebels, and the rebels can't escape because we find out that the First Order is actually tracking them through hyperspace. So if they make the jump to hyperspace, they'll run out of fuel, and then the First Order will track them again. So what they do is they have to find a code breaker to actually break into the First Order ship and disable the tracker, and try and do it silently, so they'll have around 6 minutes to jump to hyperspace so the First Order can't track them and find them again. At this point, the First Order have already fired upon the rebel base, and they've had to actually evacuate, so we see Leia and all the other rebels jump into the actual outer part of the planet after the rebel base is blown up. Since they can't jump to hyperspace, what they have to do is get this code breaker, so it makes this story arc where Finn and this new female character Rose, who we met on the ship when he was actually trying to escape the ship in an escape pod, she stuns him in a sort of comical fashion. I guess they become a hero and a sidekick almost, and they go to this casino planet to find this code breaker because they had a hologram previously from Maz Kanata from Maz's castle in Takodana in the 7th film. She tells them that there's a code breaker who can help them out on this casino planet, and I can't remember what the planet is called. They go to this casino planet, and it almost seemed surreal. It didn't seem like something we see in Star Wars, but that's not a complaint from me because I thought it was really new and unique. It was a really awesome planet. The CG on the planet was absolutely spectacular for a start. We saw these alien horse type creatures, like an alien horse racing event, massive casinos, a gold city, and all these rich people, like a completely different sort of perspective on what we'd see in the galaxy and the normal films. So we saw the rich side and how these rich people on the planet were making so much money from selling ships to the First Order. And they find this master code breaker, but then they get arrested because they parked the ship in a wrong position or something happened. In jail they find this other code breaker, and this guy is sort of drunk and he's tripping up on his words. This is played by the guy that everyone was actually prophesizing would be Ezra, but he's just a code breaker, or at least that's what he is to us so far. They use him and they go onto the First Order ship, so they basically escape this planet's prison. This code breaker and BB-8 actually escape, and then they pick up Finn and Rose and they go into space onto the First Order ship. Once they're on the First Order ship, they do actually break the tracker, and once on there though, they do get found out and arrested by the First Order. This is because the code breaker actually turns them in, and what happens here is actually pretty epic. Note, before Finn and Rose actually are on the ship, they're disguised in First Order uniform as well before they do get found out. At the start you do see Rey going up the lift because after she leaves the island, she's really tempted to confront Kylo Ren, try and turn him to the light side, and we will actually pick up on that later after I finish this story up. So basically they get found out and arrested, and somehow Finn actually does escape, and they do actually escape, and Finn has a really epic fight with Captain Phasma. And there was a funny line, I think he calls her Chrome Dome, like, let's go Chrome Dome, and they have this awesome fight, and Finn uses one of those electric staffs that you see the actual Stormtrooper TR-8 actually use on him when he yells traitor in the 7th film. He uses one of those and fights Phasma, who has this vibro spear, and they go at it in a big fight. Basically ends with Phasma actually winning, or appearing to win Finn. It looks like he's knocked down some sort of shaft, but he comes back on a lift when she's not looking, and he absolutely strikes her in the face, and you see her helmet, Phasma's, does actually break, and you can see part of her face and her eye around that sort of area, and she says something like, you always were worthless, or you always were stupid, or some sort of degrading line. And then after that, I think Finn hits her with the staff again, or she falls off down into the actual shaft below, or some sort of explosion triggers it and she falls down into an exploding blaze of fire and debris, which is a really cool ending for Phasma. It was kind of a shame we didn't get more of Phasma, you know, find out who her character was, what she did, or she wasn't in other films, because she looked like a cool character. And that was a slight disappointment, although the send-off was really cool, I guess. And that is also in the same fashion as how Snoke was portrayed, which we'll get onto later. Moving on to the other story arc, this is where Rey is actually confronting Kylo Ren. She's in the ship, she goes up the lift, and she confronts Kylo Ren. The way that she actually does get onto the ship, however, is she comes down on an escape pod from the Millennium Falcon, which crashes inside the hangar of the First Order ship. This is the First Order flagship, Snoke ship, and when it crashes down, Kylo meets her and he instructs his stormtroopers to arrest her. So very much so in the fashion of Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, with a Death Star, rather this is actually the flagship or First Order flagship Star Destroyer. Kylo Ren and Rey, both of them go up in a lift to Snoke, so it's basically like when Yoda took Luke to the Emperor. So slight elements of the 5th film and also the 6th in this. So this is when things get really interesting, and this is probably the best scene in the film, what I'm going to describe here, or possibly one of the best, if not second best, as there's a really awesome scene later. So what happens is they basically confront Snoke. Kylo has an idea in mind, obviously, which we'll see later, and Snoke congratulates Kylo on his great apprentice actually bringing the girl to him, aka Rey, and they do have a confrontation. He tells Rey to come closer. You'd think that Rey would walk, but then Snoke actually pulls her in with the Force, and then actually pulls her into the air and seizes her. He notes that what he wants to do is get to her friends and actually destroy the Resistance and then put an end to her because she's too powerful. What she does is she actually uses the Force to get her lightsaber, but then Snoke counteracts it with his Force and actually hits her in the head with the lightsaber, which was quite a funny scene. But then after that she uses the Force again, but this time to grab Kylo Ren's lightsaber, and she ignites it. And after this, Snoke actually says that she has a fiery spirit like that of a Jedi, and that's why Snoke needs to put an end to her. At some point in this, Snoke peers into her mind and actually says to them that he was playing with both of their minds. So what Snoke was doing was putting thoughts into Rey's mind and putting thoughts into Kylo's mind, because Snoke knew that Kylo would tell Rey his weakness, and Rey would actually in turn try to bring him to the light. So he was playing with him, and actually the whole thought process and meddling with the minds was due to him. So what I want to know because of that is there was a strong connection between them both, which seemed like kind of like a sibling connection like Luke and Leia. But I want to know if this is entirely false and the only reason they had it is because of Snoke, or they had it and then Snoke played with it. So I'm really interested to know what that is. But basically this is what he says, and I guess they kind of get mad. Kylo sort of gets mad, you know, that he's been played with by Snoke and he's had enough. And at some point Snoke actually says about Kylo that Kylo, there's no way that Rey can turn him and he's fully embodied in the dark side. And I think what happens next is really awesome, but the only way that Snoke didn't know that Kylo would actually turn on him, which is what happens next, is because Kylo was still using the dark side. And obviously he wasn't close to the light, and what we'll find out later is he was using his rage and his dark side powers to put an end to Snoke, and that's why Snoke didn't actually understand what was going to happen. So Kylo uses the Force and he ignites Rey's lightsaber, which is actually near Snoke, and he uses the Force to cut Snoke from the waist with the blue lightsaber and pulls the lightsaber towards him. Snoke just falls into 2 pieces on the floor and he's presumably dead. The Praetorian Guards, which are the red armoured guards that are very similar in fashion to the royal guards that the Emperor had, actually get all the weapons out and a huge fight scene ensues. So we see a big fight from these big Praetorian Guards with different weapons, staffs, blades, and we see Kylo and Rey face off between them back to back, and we see a really awesome fight scene. And it would seem that these guards might have lightsaber proof armor, because it does take quite some blows to kill them. Some certain blows don't actually put an end to the guards, but we see some really awesome fight scenes with Kylo and Rey. It's almost like light and dark fighting the bigger evil. And that's what it does seem. And then at the end it's revealed that Kylo puts his hand out to Rey and asks her to join him, and Rey says, you know, don't do this, come to the light. And what his greater ideal in mind is to actually just put an end to Snoke and then take over himself and have Rey as his acting apprentice, and they lead the First Order. So he has different traits and different thoughts in mind to Rey, and Rey ultimately does decline this. Rey actually forces her lightsaber in. There's like a battle between them who can get the lightsaber using the Force, and then Rey does actually ultimately end up escaping. The Rebel flagship, after all this, is actually destroyed. One of the main admirals, Admiral Holdo, who's in charge of the ship, or Vice Admiral, actually stays behind on the ship, and all these little pods go out to try and escape. And they do actually find out about the pods, but eventually they do manage to escape, and they go to a planet called Crait. And Crait is this big snowy planet, and this is another aspect which mirrors the 5th film, The Empire Strikes Back, because Crait is a snowy planet very similar in fashion to Hoth, and they do have First Order AT-ATs which do actually walk across the snow. So this is very similar to Episode 5 when they're in the trenches. All the rebels are aiming at these big AT-ATs which seem like big terrors just marching towards them, and this is very much so like what happens in this film. Now what happens on this planet is they actually go to this old rebel base which is hidden, and there's only one way into the base, and these are huge big iron doors, and they use it as a hideout, which is an ancient rebel hideout, they know. What happens is the First Order does find them. Kylo Ren comes in his space shuttle, and all these AT-ATs come, and they do get in the trenches ready to fight. What they do is they get in these weird ships, so we see Poe Dameron, we see Rose, and we see Finn, and they're flying towards this big super weapon, because their base has these big 2 iron gates, but the First Order has this big super weapon which is noted as being a miniaturized Death Star weaponry. And what it does is it's a battering ram laser, so what it'll do is it'll cut straight through this door, and it's a huge big beam that's directed towards these gates, and that's how they're going to break through into the rebel base. So what they do is they go in these ships to try and get rid of it and bomb it. Most of the ships get destroyed, and Poe says, you know, it's time to turn back. I guess that would result in them having to surrender or fight till the end. But Finn just goes straight for it, and he goes straight for the laser. What he's going to do is he's going to sacrifice himself, and he's going to fly straight into this weapon and destroy it, and once that gets destroyed, he won't be able to get into the base anymore. But for some reason, Rose crashes into a ship, so he doesn't do it, and the weapon's still active. So she literally prevents one of the only ways of putting an end to the First Order's onslaught onto the rebel base, which is absolutely crazy. And I thought at the time, like, why is she doing this? She's literally just ruining the whole plan. But what does happen later is actually spectacular. So we see Finn gets saved and drags Rose from the wreckage, and they go back into the rebel base. And I don't know how he dragged her so far across the snow at this point into the base, but I guess there's some sort of explanation for that. I don't know. But anyway, back in the base we see a shadowy figure. When you first see it, it's kind of obvious it's going to be Luke, because you presume maybe he's had a change of heart and he's come back. And Luke does actually confront Leia, and they have, you know, some emotional moments, him apologising for the Kylo situation and for exiling himself. And what happens is he says he's going to confront Kylo. He goes out into the snow to confront Kylo, but you'd think it would be a confrontation, but Kylo is a real coward about it. He doesn't confront Luke face to face at this point. He says all the First Order walkers fire straight on that man, put an end to him. So you see all these First Order AT-ATs firing just on Luke, and you'd think Luke would not be alive at this point, but he emerges from literally about 2 minutes of firing straight on him. And you think, as he used a force shield, is Luke really this powerful? He's transcended from the dark and the light, and he's something new. So you think this Jedi who's transcended light and dark, and who isn't even a Jedi anymore, is so powerful, because these walkers are actually firing upon him, and then he emerges unscathed. So basically Kylo rushes down and actually confronts him, and we see a big fight scene, a series of blows. Luke is kind of like some sort of ancient sensei. He just completely drops and dodges some of the lightsaber blows from Kylo, and he just does spins and all these fancy moves that you'd expect from a real master who's been developing his force power, and yet again completely unscathed. And then we see Kylo striking straight through him. Before this moment, Luke says, if you strike me down in anger just like your father, I'll be with you forever. So it does show that Kylo is perhaps haunted by the spirit of Han Solo, or the emotions he feels from actually putting an end to it. Kylo does it anyway, he strikes straight through Luke. Then at this point, we see the camera place back on Luke and Kylo. You'd expect this to be the end of Luke, just like you see Obi-Wan Kenobi in episode 4. But this isn't how it happens. Luke is still standing, and I think he actually mocks Kylo, and then he disappears, and we find out Luke is actually a Force aberration. And you think Luke does look a bit different, because he looks like a bit of a more younger Luke, perhaps even in the style that when Kylo was training with him, and then he disappears. And by this time, the Resistance have basically already escaped through a different tunnel they found by following these creatures on the planet. So Luke is buying them time, and obviously during this process the rebels realise that, more importantly Poe Dameron realises, and they actually escape. And then Luke disappears, and we see a part on Octu where Luke's meditating, and then he drops down onto the rock in exhaustion, and Luke is exhausted. He's exerted all his powers and he collapses. He does wake up, however, but then in the end we do see him fade away, and his cloak drops just like Obi-Wan did in episode 4, and then the cloak blows off into the wind. It seems that Luke was using some sort of power to project himself as a Force ghost or aberration. Both Leia and Rey do feel the passing of Luke, and he vanishes. And that's basically the end of the whole narrative. We have some questions, and I thought The Last Jedi was an absolutely awesome film, one of my favourites. I thought it was even better than The Force Awakens. We do have quite a lot of haters. Although the majority liked it, quite a lot of people hate certain scenes like the casino, and someone did tell me there's a boring scene which you'll notice, but I really didn't notice it, and now after watching other people's reviews, I guess they meant the casino, but I actually enjoyed that. So all in all, I thought the film was absolutely great. There was great implementation of CGI, and literally like nearly every new Star Wars film, such as Rogue One and The Force Awakens, we had so many new alien races. We had these seal-like creatures that Luke actually gets milk from on his island to survive. We had so many different things. The CG planets were absolutely awesome, like the big casino construct. That gold city was really cool. Obviously the lightsaber effects effects are quite basic, but they were really nice as well. I thought the writing of the film was really good as well. It played off episode 7 and continued seamlessly, no issues there. Although my only small complaint was Snoke kind of played a minimal role, because he was blown up to be some huge superpower, and then in episode 8 he just got killed, which is kind of a shame. I guess the fan base kind of blew Snoke up more than Disney and the film industry, but with all the clues and stuff, it was kind of a bit of a letdown in that regard. But then again, I'm a filmmaker over a critic, so I can understand and sympathise with other filmmakers. So I will say, all in all, the film was great and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I do want to watch it a second time, but I won't be watching it in the cinema, so I'll have to wait until it gets released. I've seen The Force Awakens probably about 5 or 6 times already. The Last Jedi I'll probably watch even more. So some questions I have and some questions other people have, these are quite popular that I want answered. Who was Supreme Leader Snoke? Why was he blown up to be so huge and then he was just killed? And what was his purpose? I think he actually just served as a purpose just so Kylo went fully to the dark side, because when he striked Snoke down in anger and rage, he completed his full transition to the dark side. So I think this was Snoke's plan. It's kind of weird because apprentices always strike down the masters. Will Rey and Kylo Ren actually work together in the end and actually take over the galaxy? I don't think Rey will actually work with Kylo Ren, but it will be awesome maybe if Kylo's redeemed and they work together maybe as Jedi or something to take down the First Order. That would be really nice. Who is the new Resistance leader now, and what will happen to Princess Leia? So first of all, RIP and my condolences towards the Carrie Fisher incident. That was really upsetting, and unfortunately we've lost a really great character to the actual franchise and universe. But with that, what will happen to her character with Princess Leia? I really hope they do a great send-off to her, maybe in episode 9 or 10, just like a tribute, a really nice send-off, or maybe they just make a really good excuse for why she's not there. But a great send-off, kind of in the style of Paul Walker in Fast and Furious 7, would be really good and really great for the fans. The Knights of Ren ? Basically just that as a question. Who are the Knights of Ren? What will happen to them? Where are they now? What are they doing? So we kind of got a snippet of this in the actual film. If you see, there's an explanation of after Kylo burnt down the temple, he slew half of the students and then took some of them with him. So I think the students that Kylo took with him, he actually turned into Knights of Ren. So he was their leader, the leader of the Knights of Ren, and these other students were actually his apprentices or his followers, and they were the Knights of Ren. That's my theory because it seems like the most plausible. Otherwise, what would have happened to these other students? So I believe they were the Knights of Ren. So whether the Knights of Ren have become extinct, if you like, or eradicated, I believe these students were the Knights of Ren. Why didn't Snoke sense Kylo's betrayal? Well, in my opinion, this is really simple. Kylo was still using the dark side when he struck down Snoke. He wasn't using the light side, and his intentions were completely in the side of the dark side because he wanted to take over and become the new Supreme Leader, which he did, and he is now the Supreme Leader of the First Order. So Kylo says he knows who Rey's parents are in the film, and he says that they're simple traders or beggars who actually sold her. So was he lying about her heritage or her parentage, or was he telling the truth? And also, if it wasn't Snoke who actually created the Force bond between Rey and Kylo, that's kind of like a weird sibling bond. So I want to find out if Snoke entirely created that, or if he was just fiddling with them when they were in that sort of Force bond, because that's something you only see in siblings like Leia and Luke. And my final question is, who was the boy at the end sweeping the floor? He was in that casino planet with the alien horse racing incident with all the other kids. I wonder if he will develop into a main character or some sort of crucial character in the Resistance, because he did keep the Resistance ring. So all in all, I enjoyed The Last Jedi. Please tell me what you think in the comments below, what you thought of the film. This review was not scripted. This is entirely my thoughts after coming fresh out of the film last night, and also what I remember of the plotline. Some parts might have been a bit slower, or I might have forgot crucial parts of the story. This is because I didn't script it and do more research. I wanted to do a fresh thing, and I wanted my thoughts to be unbiased. I didn't want to be actually representing other people's points of view or reviews. I read very minimalist reviews. I only looked at sort of questions to see if they were the same as my own. Thanks a lot for watching. Like the video if you enjoyed it and want to see more reviews. I still need to drop my Blade Runner 2049 review, which I will do in the future. Subscribe to the channel for more reviews on films and also vlogs, and leave a comment below telling me who your favourite character is in the new Star Wars movies, so that I know that you got to the end of the video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.